Ever feel like someone somewhere just like flips a switch and boom, the internet just works?
You mean like it's all magic?
Yeah, well, not magic exactly, but you know what I mean. It's easy to forget about all the systems and servers and protocols working behind the scenes.
Until something goes wrong.
Exactly. And then it's like, all chaos. Today, we're diving into a system that's basically the backbone of most large organizations. Active Directory, or AD for short.
And, as you might guessed, when a system that critical gets compromised, things can go very wrong.
Think target breach level bad. Millions of credit card numbers stolen, all because hackers got into, though you guessed it, Active Directory.
And that's just one example. It's used by about 90% of Fortune 1000 companies. We're talking about the system that controls who has access to what on a network, the keys to the kingdom, so to speak.
So if hackers can get their hands on those keys, they can pretty much unlock any door they want.
That's exactly right.
So how do they do it? How do they break into a system that's supposed to be super secure? Well, our source material for this deep dive is like a hacker's playbook. It's a cybersecurity training module from TryHackMe called Breaching AD. And let me tell you, it's a real eye-opener.
It really exposes how attackers think and operate.
For starters, they often go after those older, more vulnerable authentication protocols like NTLM.
Yeah, NTLM is kind of like using a bicycle lock on your front door. Sure, it might deter some casual thieves, but anyone who's serious about getting in can break it pretty easily.
So how does it actually work? I mean, what makes NTLM so easy to exploit?
It all comes down to how it handles passwords. See, with NTLM, your password isn't actually sent over the network. Instead, it's turned into something called a hash.
A hash, so it's like scrambled up, made unreadable.
Exactly. But the problem is these older hash algorithms, they're not as secure as we once thought.
So attackers find a way to grab that hash and then unscramble it, like working backward through a maze.
Exactly. There are tools available online that can crack these older NTLM hashes ridiculously fast.
So it's like having a secret code, but then someone hands out the decoder ring to anyone who wants it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then there's another tactic attackers use, something called an LDAP passback attack. It all starts with a network device, something most people wouldn't think twice about.
Okay, give me an example.
Say, a network printer.
A printer?
Yeah.
Seriously, what could a hacker possibly want with my printer?
Well, you'd be surprised. Many printers have these things called LDAP settings.
LDAP.
Yeah, LDAP. It stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. Think of it as a way for devices on a network to talk to Active Directory and verify things like usernames and passwords.
Okay, that makes sense. So the printer uses LDAP to authenticate with AD.
You got it. Now imagine a hacker gets into that printer, maybe through a vulnerability in its firmware or something.
Okay, so the hacker is inside the printer. What next?
They can change the printer's LDAP settings, redirecting them from the legitimate Active Directory server to their own malicious server that they control.
So now when the printer tries to authenticate.
Bam. It's sending those credentials straight to the hacker.
Sneaky. I never would have thought of a printer as a weak point. But it just goes to show, any device on the network, if it's not properly secured, can become an entry point.
Absolutely. And it's not always about high-tech exploits either. Sometimes it's the simplest things that trip people up.
Like what?
Configuration files.
Configuration files. Those things that pop up when you install a new program, asking if you want to allow changes to your computer.
Exactly. Those seemingly harmless files can actually be a goldmine for attackers.
How so? What kind of information is in there?
You'd be surprised. Sometimes usernames, passwords, even API keys, all just sitting there in plain text.
Wait, in plain text, no encryption, no nothing.
You got it. Anyone who stumbles upon the file can read it, and attackers know exactly where to look for these files.
Wow, it's like hiding your house key under the welcome mat. You think it's hidden, but everyone knows that's the first place a burglar is going to look. And we have a perfect example of this from our source material, right?
Absolutely. Remember McAfee, the antivirus software?
Yeah, who doesn't?
Well, they have this enterprise endpoint security software that uses a file called man.db to store encrypted credentials.
Encrypted? That sounds pretty secure, right?
You'd think so. But hackers are a resourceful bunch. They found ways to either exploit vulnerabilities in the software itself or use brute force methods to decrypt those credentials.
So even security software can have vulnerabilities. That's a little unsettling.
It's all about understanding how these systems work, where the weaknesses might be, and how an attacker might try to exploit them.
All right, so we've talked about how hackers can snag those initial AD credentials, but that's often just the first step, right?
Exactly. It's like getting your foot in the door. You wouldn't
Okay.
just stand there in the entryway. You'd want to explore the whole house, see what you can get into.
Especially if you're a hacker looking for valuable data to steal or systems to compromise.
That's where lateral movement comes in. Think of it as the attacker moving through the network, like a shadow, from one compromised system to another, trying to gain more access, more privileges.
Because logging in as like some low-level employee, that probably doesn't get you access to the good stuff, right? The crown jewels.
Right. You might be able to read some emails or access some basic files, but to do real damage, you need higher level permissions.
So how do they climb that ladder? What are some common techniques for lateral movement?
One way is by exploiting weaknesses in a network's configuration. For instance, they might look for systems with weak or default passwords, the ones that IT never got around to changing.
Oops.
Or they might take advantage of software vulnerabilities. Remember those configuration files we talked about earlier?
Right, those harmless little files that can be hiding critical information in plain sight.
Exactly. It's all about finding those cracks in the foundation and prying them open.
So it's like a domino effect. One compromised system can give them a foothold to target others, and then others until they reach their target.
Precisely. And the scary part is, attackers are constantly upping their game. They're always on the lookout for new exploits, new ways to slip past security measures.
Talk about a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. So if you're responsible for protecting a network, say, you're the head of IT for a company, how do you even begin to defend against this kind of attack?
Knowledge is your best weapon. You need to understand how these attackers operate, what tools and techniques they use, and what your most valuable assets are.
So basically know your enemy and know yourself.
Exactly. And then it's about building a multi-layered security approach. Think strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, intrusion detection systems, and regular security audits.
So it's like building a fortress with multiple layers of defense to deter attackers.
A very fitting analogy.
Yeah.
But even the strongest fortress can be breached if the people inside aren't vigilant. And that's why user education and security awareness training are paramount.
The human element again. Because all those fancy security measures won't mean a thing if someone falls for a phishing scam or gives away their credentials.
You hit the nail on the head. That's why creating a culture of security awareness is so important. Employees need to understand the importance of things like strong passwords, recognizing phishing attempts, and reporting suspicious activity.
Basically, empowering everyone to be a cyber defender, not just the IT department.
Exactly. It takes a village to secure a network, and everyone has a role to play.
Okay, so the hacker is in. They're moving through the network like a digital ghost. But they're still stuck using those low-level credentials they snagged at the start. How do they actually climb the ladder of privilege within the system? Like, what's their end game?
That's where things get really interesting. It's not about brute force at this point, but rather finding those subtle cracks in the system and leveraging them for maximum gain. One common strategy is exploiting software vulnerabilities. Think about all those times you've clicked ignore on those software update reminders.
Oh, man. Guilty as charged. I'm the king of postponing updates. But I'm guessing those updates aren't just about adding new emojis to my messaging app.
You'd be surprised how many people leave themselves vulnerable just by putting off those updates. Outdated software is often riddled with security holes that attackers can slip through. Think of it like reinforcing your front door, but leaving a window wide open.
So even if a system is generally secure, one outdated program could be all it takes for a hacker to gain a foothold, escalate their privileges, and then it's game over.
It's a classic attack vector. And it's not just about exploiting technical weaknesses either. Social engineering plays a huge role as well.
So it's back to the human element again, tricking someone into giving up the keys to the kingdom.
Exactly. An attacker might impersonate a tech support agent, send a carefully crafted phishing email, or even use social media to gather information and build trust with their target.
It's scary how convincing these attacks can be. I've even fallen for a well-disguised phishing email or two in my day.
It happens to the best of us. That's why security awareness training is so crucial. It's about giving people the knowledge and tools they need to identify and report these threats, not blaming them when they inevitably slip up.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, even the most sophisticated security system is only as strong as its weakest link, and that link is often human.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from how hackers breach Active Directory to how they move laterally within a network, and ultimately how they escalate their privileges to achieve their objectives. It's kind of chilling when you think about it.
It definitely highlights the importance of cybersecurity.
So what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What can they do to protect themselves? I mean, I'm feeling a little paranoid right now.
I hear you. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, but the most important thing is to be proactive. Don't wait for something bad to happen before you take action. Keep your software up to date. Use strong and unique passwords. Be wary of suspicious emails and links. And for goodness sake, enable multi-factor authentication wherever you can.
All great advice. And you know what else? It's a team effort. We all have a role to play in making the digital world a little bit safer.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. A huge thank you to our expert for taking us through the ins and outs of Active Directory breaches. It's been enlightening, to say the least.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners out there, stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay safe. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.